Welcome everybody to episode 15 of Game Retail Ramblings. I'm your host Travis Severance, coming to you live from Flower City, Rochester, New York, in the control center of the largest game store in the Great Lakes region, Millennium Games. Great to have you all here today. Thanks to everybody who tuned in for last week's episode. The views on the events show was phenomenal. The back and forth conversation was really good. We crested over 600 subs as well, so that's just a number that I never imagined that I'd ever get to see. Today's sort of a big day for me. I get to celebrate 17 years of sobriety, so that's pretty cool for me on a personal level. Just to give you a little information about myself, that's pretty wild to think about. I've owned the store now with my business partner for 14, so I guess it was a pretty good idea to stop doing the drugs and the alcohol. So overall, we're doing real good. So last week's events focus was pretty good. I forgot number 3, but I took care of that in the comments. Hopefully we're not going to do that today. One of the things to remember about events and decision making from stores and things like that is, for better or for worse, every store is going to figure out how to do certain things a different way. Some stores aren't going to run events. Some stores are going to be only events focused. They're not going to have, as much product or inventory and things like that. There's no specific right way to do it. I'm telling you how I'm doing it and how we do it here because it's the easiest thing for me to talk about. And I try not to press into anybody else's way that they're going to run their business, because if it's working for them, that's the most important. My hope is here that if somebody's struggling or if somebody's looking to get started or something like that, they can take the information that I'm putting out here and be able to not necessarily copy it, but maybe put it into their own way, and be successful. And that's what I'm looking to do, right? I'm trying to give as much feedback as I can on the stuff that's working here, so that they can take the information that works for them and apply it. So that's really the goal. And I'm going to let you in on something that's a secret here, and I might lose some subs because of this. I'm not doing anything special. Like, anybody can walk into my store, they can take a look around with a retail mind and then be able to figure out, this is what I'm doing here. It's still just buying stuff and selling stuff. It's hosting events, it's running some sales and things like that. Maybe we're doing it at a higher level than a good chunk of the people out there that are doing it, but there's nothing like, I don't have any special sauce here. Like, this is just retail, game store retail on its face with a business mindset applied to it. Thus far, the feedback's been fantastic though. There's a ton of customers that come up to me every day and they're happy to get a little bit of insight underneath the hood. I'm happy to share as best that I can. There's some proprietary stuff that I wouldn't talk about on the stream itself, but you get me in a room and we have a conversation about it. I'm probably willing to share a little bit more freely on certain things. But today we are going to talk about UVS Games, Universal Fighting System at one point. The game launched in 2006 by a company called Sabertooth Games. At the time, it was maybe their 3rd or 4th CCG. They had sort of focused on Warhammer licenses. Previous to that, they had a game called Warcry that was based on the Warhammer Fantasy universe, and there was a Warhammer 40K card game and another iteration of that. It was started up by a gentleman named Steve Horvath, who's still around the industry, who's been around the industry for quite a while, and is somebody that I talk to and that I've had times when we've been really close together as far as our business relationships have been. And he's grown into different roles and stuff, and different times we stay in touch with each other. So he's somebody that, he started fairly close to when I was starting and stuff like that. So we've got career trajectories that are sort of similar. It's just his in publishing and mine's in retail. So their first set that they came out with was actually just a starter for Penny Arcade, which was super popular at the time, a little starter set for that. And then sets 1 and 2 that were released simultaneous were Street Fighter and Soul Calibur. When the game first came out, I bought heavy into Street Fighter. I'm a big giant Street Fighter nerd. I don't care as much about Soul Calibur, but I was really focused on Street Fighter, so I put a bunch of my own revenue into that and bought a ton of that, and the first set did really well for the store as well. I played a lot of that games. The game was designed by Ryan Miller. And if Ryan's name's familiar, he's the lead designer for Lorcana. Before he was the lead designer for UFS, he was actually one of the designers that worked on Magic as well. So his pedigree and the number of booster packs that a Ryan Miller designed game has sold historically is a pretty high batting average for designers in that space. Sabertooth sort of owned the company for a number of years after that. FFG sort of stepped in and grabbed onto them and started releasing UFS products, and they were sort of folded into the FFG space. FFG was doing some different card games at the time. They had Arkham Horror, Game of Thrones, and a handful of other things that they were working on as well. So Steve went along to FFG. They managed to make it 12 sets. So April 2006 to April 2009. 12 sets is a fairly good run. At the end of their run, there was a really heartfelt post that went up on one of their forums from Steve himself talking about sort of where the situation was with the game and how difficult it was for him to shut it down. You know, he's a lifelong CCG fan. He was big into L5R. CCG's flow in his blood, which is why for those of us that play Star Wars Unlimited or get to work with Star Wars Unlimited, he's loosely attached to that program that now. And you can see some of his fingerprints on that product. The post basically said the landscape of the CCG market was really, really competitive at the time. Their fan base was had deteriorated. They had lost some players, and they were looking at, you know, only having about 1,000 players that were engaged with the game at the time. And when you're going to make CCGs and you have to order paper and the business part of the process and the artwork and the graphics and all the design that goes into it, you need a certain amount of scale for a CCG to be successful, because you have to order the paper way ahead of time. The paper actually has to cure. The weave has to be the same. There's a lot that goes into making CCGs. They're one of the most difficult products to try to make, despite how many of them you see now and how easy it looks with Kickstarter and crowdfunding and stuff like that. But you also see the number of them that have failed. Like, obviously more of them have failed than have succeeded. You know, with this game being 16 years old or so, it's the fourth oldest game in CCG in the market. So there's Magic, then there's Pokemon, and there's Yu-Gi-Oh, and then there's this one. And everything else in the middle, the hundreds of games in the middle of that, have all failed, right? And there's been hundreds of games since this game has come out that has also failed. So there's something about the game, there's a stickiness to the game that makes players want to continue to come back. And what happened was, after they announced that, a gentleman by the name of Jason Horansky came in and bought the publishing rights to the game. That happened in May of 2010. Jasco Games was formed. I didn't have and have never had a great business relationship with Jason. From a professional standpoint, I'm not going to go into picking through what that looked like or what happened, or, you know, any of the tea that happened between him and I, or some of the decisions that he made and stuff like that. So I'll just leave it as that. When Jasco took it over from Sabretooth, my enthusiasm for carrying the game as a retailer waned quite a bit. And there were a lot of different things that happened during the lifetime of the game while it was under Jasco's stewardship that the community endured, that retailers endured, that a lot of people had to endure. You know, the inconsistency with the sets, inconsistency with inventory, licenses that were expired, and problems with having to destroy product, and a whole bunch of things. Well, in the middle of that, when my interest post Sabretooth had gone down, I had a group of local players that were playing the game pretty consistently through the entire inception of the game. So what happened was, one of my customers, Sean O'Brien, formed his online business, Rochester CCG. They were big on pre-orders, and they were like, there was a distributor thing that they had going on for a little while. So if I wanted product, I could buy the product from Sean at a certain cost and put it on my shelf. So when I couldn't find it in traditional distribution, he had a way for me to backstock some of that stuff. But the IPs weren't the same as what they were before. They sort of came in and came out. They were their own IP that they were creating. And the interest for the game outside of this small group of Rochester players that were really dedicated had gone down for me locally. I wasn't doing a ton because of my relationship with Jason to kind of grow the game in general, but Sean certainly swooped in and did that. And, you know, he's been around for a long time. He's by far the best vendor for the game. He sells the best singles. He runs a number of the events, super professional. Somebody that's been able to make a business out of the game for like a decade now. And that is a lot of credit to him. It's certainly not something that I found myself doing, because I just wouldn't deal with some of the stuff that was going on with the game. On top of that, there's a whole player group of Rochester CCG players that were here, in that the only part of them that I was a store where they came to play. They're fairly humble and they won't talk about it, but their accolades are second to none. The amount of wins and victories and achievements that they have historically for the game is you can't measure them against anybody else, because they're just so far above. You know, Tim Keefe and Kevin Broberg have a pile of different Create a Champ cards. Sean has a bunch of cards that he's on for different teams events, and there's a whole ton of local players here too that have won different Create a Card events and bigger events and things like that. Our store has an asset card from back in the day when they had won a teams event as well. So Sean has been a phenomenal steward of the game. My local players from the Rochester area have always been pretty humble. They are well liked within the community. So big shout out to them for letting me kind of hang out with them, and that's Jesse, Jeffrey, Ryan, Chrissy, Tim, and Kevin. The time that I've gotten to spend with those guys to sort of get to know this game again has been really great for me, and to get to know the rest of the UVS community and some of the people on the inside of that world has been really good. So what happened was, fast forward to 2019, Jason's still running the company. The MHA license is announced. So My Hero Academia, super popular, hugely successful manga, and then a well-watched anime. And all of a sudden I've got customer enthusiasm for the game again that I hadn't seen in a long time, maybe not since like Mega Man. There were employees that were excited about it. I had employees that had never heard of the game that were coming in. I had other people that were talking about the game. So there was a whole lot of hype built around the game again. The announcement came out. There was a lot of enthusiasm for it. We'll see when it's going to come out and stuff like that. So it was announced to come out in May 2020. Obviously, the world had shut down around February 2020 with COVID and stuff. It finally hit the shelves the summer of 2021. Asmodee was going to be the distributor, which was a change in business from what had been happening with Jasco before. And in the middle of all that too, there was a brand new company that came in and they were going to take over the rights of it. And the new company was called POW Interactive. Both of those things caught my attention. Number one, increased enthusiasm for that game. I have a love for that game and an enjoyment for that game at a mechanical level it puts it in, like, definitely in my top 10 CCGs ever played. And that may not feel like a lot, but I've played a lot of CCGs and I really enjoy this one, which is probably the reason why, you know, I've sort of stuck with this thing as long as I have, despite it not being, you know, an incredible seller for me at different times and things like that, and some of the struggles with dealing with the previous company. When the announcement for POW Interactive took place and I started digging in, and I saw it was a couple of young guys on the screen, and they had ties to Jake Paul's Anti-Fund and a couple of other different investors. I was super intrigued about it. This isn't the kind of stuff that we see typically that happens on not to sound offensive, but the card game itself was sort of a third-rate card game, in my opinion. At the time, the sales just weren't there. It had a fantastic license that it was coming in, but the popularity with it locally was limited. The popularity with it nationally was fairly limited. MHA was definitely doing the heavy lifting on this thing because there wasn't really a lot that had changed about the game to be able to bring the people in. And a lot of the people that continued to play it were just enduring sort of the ebb and flow of what releases looked like in the previous administration. So I was interested enough that I ended up flying to Dallas for their nationals in 2022. Sean was a vendor there. I had started messing around with the cards a little bit. I was playing in some side events with a beautiful location in the Renaissance in Dallas. The community was definitely there. There were a ton of different vendors that were there that were selling the game. They ended up going into the overflow space for the event because there were so many people that showed up. I think it was the highest attended event for UFS in history. A lot of people there, a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of excitement for the game. And I had the opportunity to sit down and talk with the principal owners of POW Interactive. I got to know them a little bit and introduced myself, and they were really open with having a conversation about some of the challenges or some of the things that I could see maybe as opportunities with the game and what I was dealing with on a retail level. We got into some really good conversations, exchanged information, and sort of separated from that meeting and said, okay, let's just kind of keep an open communication and open dialogue. What happened in that meeting was I met some really aggressive, enthusiastic owners with a really thoughtful, thought-out business plan and a good way to approach the market, with maybe not as much of an idea of what the market was like out there because they were so new to it. Coming from the finance world and coming from some of the worlds that they came into and looking at the opportunity. One of the things that was interesting to me is when you look at that purchase from the outside looking in, it's not as splashy or big as like Pokemon or a Yu-Gi-Oh or something like that. It's fairly under the radar, but somebody had to have some business acumen and some intelligence to be able to take a look and understand, all right, this game has been in the marketplace for, at the time, 14 years, and it's still around and it still survived, and they were able to take their finance brain and get into the books and stuff like that and take a look at what was available and looked at the opportunity and said, hey, let's give this thing a run and let's see what we can do. So it was pretty good. You know, as far as sales went for the game, the first set was a home run. The second set was garbage. The second set, other than the fact that it was delayed, was not well received. It wasn't super powerful. And then, you know, the third set I was sort of annoyed with them with too, because it felt like they decided to inject chrome rares into the third set. Third set was kind of weak as well, and there was like this carnival game thing because they're in there, they're using the best acumen they have for their business, but they're trying to come up with different ways to move product at a volume that's sustainable for the business. So they're trying out all these different things to try to make it work. And for me, I enjoy a company that's willing to try something out, that's going to give something a go and be able to see how it works. And if it fails, be able to make some adjustments and go forward. And that's part of what I've enjoyed about watching these guys and watching the product is that's happened a lot, and they're the first ones to admit this thing didn't work and we're going to try something else. And they were really good about handling criticism, which is good because they have a community that's sort of a double-edged sword from my time spent with them. I think the community is one of the most amazing communities that I've ever seen in terms of embracing a new player that's looking to learn the game they're absolutely fantastic about that. They're the first ones to hand somebody a deck, walk them through play lines, really get them on board, explain to them where they need to spend on singles and different things like that. They're absolutely awesome at that. And on the flip side of that, I've never seen, regardless of what the announcement is, that's come down from UVS Games or POW Entertainment about something that they're doing, whether it's something as much of as a tiny throwaway about a Red Vines promotion to card backs changing to adjustments in organized play and things like that. And the community, some members of the community just find a reason to just hammer it and axe grind it. And it's like every single decision that's made all the time it goes through this evisceration process that like the community is, I don't know why it happens as much as it does. Maybe it happens in other games and I just don't see it, but I'm part of a lot of those. So like there's this disconnect between what the company's trying to do to be a steward of the game and to move the business forward and to make the business, soluble, because the reality of it is Jasco's not selling that if the game's not failing at the time. Sabretooth's not selling that game if it's not failing at the time. And oddly enough, we're in the same sort of environment that Steve Horvath talked about, and the same sort of environment that Jason talked about when it came to time to move on. Hyper-competitive CCG market. The collectible space isn't easy right now, and it's not easy to get into, and there's a limited amount of people playing the game. So there are times when I think from a community perspective, because they've recruited all these new players and stuff like that, every single decision that's made, I don't think needs to have a scalpel attached to it and they need to be hammered on, because when you come into the community and you're new and you're a fresh player and you're looking to get involved, and it feels like every single time that something happens, there's some level of tectonic drama that goes on, it makes those people look at other places to go. And what happens is it reduces the number of people in your community. And if you want new players to play the game, then you have to be able to look at that in a wider lens decision and say, is this good for the business? Even though maybe temporarily I disagree with that thing. That's not to say that they shouldn't be challenged. You shouldn't have ideas and ways to challenge them. But I mean, personal memes with pictures of the owners up on the memes and things like that, just there's really not a space for that. Like the personal attacks and that kind of stuff, it seems like a bit much. That said, they will say more than I will say that they're not perfect. They make mistakes. They try to grow every single day. And if I didn't believe that was the case, and I didn't think they were working towards a positive outcome, I would have stopped wasting my time talking with them or dealing with them in any way, right? Like I'm sort of at the top level when it comes to retail and it comes to those sort of things. I have a lot of different opportunities, and if I felt like I was putting my efforts into something that was a losing battle, I just wouldn't do it. So today, instead of having a normal top 7, what I'm gonna do is, these are 7 back alley haymakers that I hit them in the face with at Dallas at the Nationals event, and sort of their response and how they've dealt with it as a business since then. What I will say, and I will encourage any retailer that's taken a look at this game that either has carried it or hasn't carried it to definitely do some inspection. Take a look at what they're doing now. Take a look at the new demo decks that they have coming and different things like that, and give it a try. If you haven't carried it, if you have carried it, if you're lapsed, if you didn't like it before, I would encourage you to at least spend an hour or 2 of your day, take a look at what they have to offer. So I don't have a better, cleaner way to do it. So I'm sorry, Logan, you're going to have to come up with a cool graphic for this, but it's 7 ways that I just punched them in the face, because at the Dallas event, I didn't have a relationship with them and I didn't care. And they were just going to take me at my word and we were going to go from there and we were going to leave. It didn't matter. I was going to get my shots in. So number 7 was My Hero Academia is great, but it's not going to last that long. My concern for them was, the game was fundamentally built sort of on fighting games, and it went away from that a little bit, and they got into manga, and they did some manga licenses and things. And manga and anime is super important. It's definitely on growth. It's a good place to look at licenses. My Hero Academia, based on the fundamentals of the game, works really, really well. You've got a character that represents you as a player, and you're playing through, and there's different moves and stuff, so nothing better than like a superhero school anime to be able to do what you want to do with this game. And it's a back and forth fight and things like that. It's a super important license out there. There's a lot of money and revenue generated. It brought a lot of fans in, but the problem with attaching yourself to licenses specifically, or one license specifically, is there's certain people that just don't care about My Hero Academia, and you have to get them over that hump in order to get them to play the game. And sometimes that's hard to do if they don't love whatever the license is. So their response to that was, the tail end of last year, they brought in the Cowboy Bebop and the Trigon starters. They were the first licensors for Godzilla -1, and that was before the movie was a hit. They did a promo card for that was on TCG Player that did really well. Super smart decision on the licensing when it comes to that kind of thing. And then they have a Godzilla set on the way. They finished the second set that was part of the first set series for Yu Yu Hakusho that was sort of there before, that was just never released by the previous administration. The Critical Role decks were amazingly well received. They did a fantastic job with those. And at the end of this year, most importantly, is they've got a new core set for their Spotlight format called Attack on Titan. So what I like about the mix of licenses that they choose is not only is it a buffet of licenses, it's solid licenses, and it's very wide in terms of the generation of gamers. So the opportunity to be able to hit on one of these licenses that regardless of age that somebody cares about it or their eyeballs come to the game, it's a really intelligent take on different ways to bring different consumers into the game to give it a try. That was a pretty good response for My Hero Academia isn't going to last very long. So number 6 was it's hard to invest into a game that has such inconsistent releases. So at the time, I couldn't count on the releases. The releases were pushed back. There were all kinds of things. I didn't know if 1 set was coming out or 4 sets were coming out or 5 sets are coming out or so on and so forth. So they took a brazen approach last year and they just said, here's 12 months worth of our releases, and this is when they're going to come out. Thus far, if I take a look at the releases that they've done since that time, they have hit all of their release dates within an acceptable margin based on what domestic shipping looks like now. And what I mean by that is it's not a situation where they tell me it's coming out 1 month and it comes out a quarter later. It's consistent. The newest set got pushed back a week, but everybody's sort of gotten pushed back a week here and there. So I will give them the credit for that. It's nice to know that specifically these are the releases, these are the challenger decks, these are the sets that I can count on, and I can sort of build that into my retail budget. Number 5 is it's hard to get people to play the game due to the level of complexity. So the game was designed at a time when card games in general were much more complex than the more modern card games are these days. So when I look at this card game and I compare it to the rest of the things in the market right now, it's about a 9. Magic's probably a 5 or a 6 in terms of difficulty, and Lorcana and One Piece are like a 2 or a 3. So it makes it really challenging for us to be able to convert card game players to the game because there's just so many times where you're making decisions. Like literally every card that's played, almost every card that's played by you or your opponent, there's a decision point for your opponent to make. Sometimes it's easier than others, but it takes a long time for a player to get on board for that. So their response to that was they've created some non-licensed starter decks that are sort of bare bones, that they're going to deploy to retailers, that they have a print-on-demand file that you can print those out and be able to play yourself back and forth, where you just get the general ticks of what the game is going to feel like. There's another one that's coming specifically for the Attack on Titan set that are demo decks that are framed in a way where it talks about a specific important incident inside of what that story is. So when those get released and you take a look at those, the players that are fans of Attack on Titan will be able to play the game in a smaller, reduced version and then sort of be able to bolt on some of the bigger complexities for that. They've approached it as best they can without completely stripping the game down to making it nothing like what it was before, or the reason why the fans that actually have played the game from the start to finish really love it. It's a hard thing to do. You've got the vision of what a Mustang car looks like. There's only so many different things you can do to change it before it gets completely warped and nobody thinks it's a Mustang anymore. It's safe to say they haven't turned this into the Mustang SUV or hatchback. So it's in as good a place as it can in terms of recruitment and onboarding new players. Number 4, each year it feels really challenging to figure out the changes for the organized play program at each level. There's just inconsistencies at the local level. The store championships are weird. I don't know if I got to qualify for regionals. I don't have to qualify for regionals. Who's getting invited to world championships? Do the regional qualifications even matter for the world championships? So a perfect example of this is last season, none of the players from Rochester qualified for the World Championship tournament. Several of them won major regional events. Whatever way you have your organized play constructed, if the aspirational organized play, the higher level organized play, doesn't allow those competitors that finished in high levels to perform in the highest level event that they have, there's probably an issue with that organized play. The response to that is just recently they brought in Josh Massey. Josh Massey has an insane pedigree of organized play. He's probably the best person in the world when it comes to organized play structures and success in that field. So they didn't go after number 2 or number 3 or number 8 in this category. They grabbed the best guy that was out there. And he was currently he had been attached to Star Wars Unlimited, who had just released a really positive, popular, approachable organized play program for that launch, and previously he was at Pokemon. He's just the best in the business at this. They made some announcements yesterday talking about removing qualifications for regionals. Finally, they got rid of the webcam events as well. Like, webcam events are just this leftover thing from COVID when everybody was just sort of trying to survive. And I understand there's some, the community has a lot to say about that when it comes down to it and things like that. But there's literally no other major CCG company in the entire planet that's running webcam events. And most recently, one of the very high-level players got disqualified after times cheating on webcam events. So it's really tough to police. It's tough to find real value in it. It's a game that's meant to be played face-to-face, even face-to-face. There's cheating that happens and stuff like that. It's hard to police. So I'm positive that there's members of the community that'll keep the webcams going if they're that successful and they're that needed. And maybe it'll be just a lost amount of revenue for them that they threw away. But in general, nobody else is doing webcams. They're doing a digital platform or they're doing face-to-face stuff, and that's just the way that the world is today. That said, Josh is a fantastic add to the team. Just hands down a professional when it comes to that kind of stuff. So he's been brought in sort of in the middle of the season, so he's doing a little bit of cleanup. So I'm really excited to see how this season ends and sort of his first ability to be in the kitchen and start to cook. And I think the consistency that you're going to see as a player of that game or as a retailer going in to take a look at that game is the stuff that you saw from the consistency of Pokemon and what the start of Star Wars Unlimited is. So that's encouraging whether you're playing the game now or you're a retailer that's looking to play the game. Number 3, I told them your artwork sucks, because it did. The artwork sucked. The card frame sucked. It didn't look modern. It was still shots. It was garbage. The anime was fantastic, but their card frames and the way that they did stuff was just, it didn't look good. I mean, they had announced promos at the World Championships that were really just, they were cutouts of advertisements that MHA had used on buses in Japan. Just not good, right? So now they've got what I would say is one of the best art producers on the planet when it comes to CCGs. The artwork and the different things that they've been releasing recently have been fantastic. If you take a look at that Critical Role deck and you were to put that side by side with any Magic set, it is as good or better. They changed the card frames and they changed the card backs. There were some complaints about that from the community. They made some adjustments and things like that. But overall, looking at the cards now, they're a lot more beautiful. The foil treatments that they're doing, the ways that they're handling some of the rarities and things like that, there's a real intelligence to that design. I've seen a handful of the Attack on Titan stuff, and I'm just going to wait and let you guys see it. It's out of control. Out of control. Number 2, what can we do about the design of the game to try to make it so that it's a little bit more approachable? Or why don't we cover our bases and look at having the ability to do something like a limited format? The game doesn't lend itself well to draft. It doesn't lend itself well to a sealed format. It would be really nice if there was another way for us to move packs or to be able to get people in with a limited card pool. They had pre-releases before, but sets were really not designed for sealed play, despite us kind of clunking our way through it each time a set came out. The response to that was they brought in Bill Stark with a little bit over a decade of Magic experience and put him with the design team that was there, the senior design team that was already there. And they started working their way through it and taking an approach to the sets and the cards with a limited standpoint as much as they are constructed. The game was really designed to be constructed and sort of narrowly focused on the design with, a champ card and then kits for the champ card and things like that. And there were some interactions that took place, but there wasn't a wider look at it. And some of the people that have been around for that will look at some of the cards and some of the sets and say, well, these are throwaway cards. Well, they're not throwaway cards. They're cards that are made specifically to function inside of sealed and inside of draft. And, well, I've got a bunch of garbage cards that I'm not going to use. If you choose not to play those, that's true. But it's also a game that lends itself where when you look at the quality of cards and what you can play, regardless of how many attacks there are, there's always the best attack. Back alley haymaker was back alley haymaker for a reason. Like there were a ton of these different times in the game when it was just the best thing, regardless of how many attacks were designed for that symbol or whatever. So I'm interested to see seeing some of this stuff and some of the adjustments for the Attack on Titan stuff. It's a massive set. It's built for draft. It's built for limited. It's built to play within itself, sort of the way that Magic did when they had blocks. It's a spotlight format, and I'm interested to see what the community thinks about it, but I think it's probably one of the biggest sets and one of the biggest steps that I've ever seen a card game take with their own game to try to move that game forward. Number 1 is that nothing you do as a company matters more than me being able to sell the boxes for a profit. So if your game is worth nothing, all of the other things that I talked about, if I cannot make money selling the game, there's no reason for me to want to carry it as a retailer. There's no reason to buy it as a player, right? the whole premise, the whole reason for us to be around is based on profit. So when the boxes become day one dead, like they had in some of the previous My Hero sets, retail's going to turn their back on that product. There's no money to be made in any of the spaces because your supply is not meeting your demand and things like that. So they, their response to that was actually to rip off their map policy, which feels like it would go in the opposite direction. That should probably tank the thing because you no longer have a minimum advertised price. But actually what ended up happening was it looks like they did a better job controlling their supply and demand. So if you look at their last two sets, Yu Yu Hakusho and Jetburn, they both sell for a profit on TCG even after you pay their fees. So they're selling in store better. They've figured out a way to make it so that the boxes maintain their profit, and that's a good thing. If you look at the pre-sale for the Girl Power stuff, that's $99.99 right now. Full retail I think is $110. Pretty good, especially with the pre-release this weekend coming up. That's my number one thing. My number one thing was the boxes need to make profit. The boxes now make profit. They're sellable. There's good cards in them. The game has continued to grow. Really good showing in the Las Vegas regional a couple of weeks ago when I was there. Numbers look really encouraging. I'm interested to see what these other licenses do in the middle. This Girl Power set looks pretty good as well. We're hosting our pre-release this weekend, and I know there's a number of other stores that are as well. If you have one in your area and you're a player, definitely go in and check them out. If you don't have one in your retailer, take a look at the game. Spend the time to be able to do that. UVS Games is far from perfect. They make mistakes constantly. I call them out on mistakes all the time. Sometimes it's just a lack of knowledge and a lack of understanding, but it's not a lack of willingness or a lack of desire to get better. If anything, I wish the community that's out there that takes shots at them actually would take a real wider angle view at what they're trying to do, and the reality that if they weren't there and they weren't doing this and they didn't have the business acumen that they do with the finances that they do, this game would just be dead. Like there wouldn't be anything to criticize because the game would be on the editor's floor and it would just be done. Like nobody's picking this thing up to run and things like that. So give them a little bit of grace maybe when you see some things that happen that maybe you're not encouraged with, and just allow them a little space to get in there and make the adjustments that they need to make. Because regardless of what you think about their business decisions, if the business isn't solvent and it's not successful, then the game doesn't persist. So when it comes to getting upset about Steve Aoki shirts or whatever the thing is, like sometimes reserve that judgment and just allow the thing to be what it is, and understand that maybe everything that's being done all the time isn't necessarily for you as a player, but there's other players out there where they need to do that, or there's a business reason they need to do that. So that's it for today. I don't have a topic for next week, and next week I'm actually going to be at the ACD Open House in Madison, Wisconsin, which means we're probably going to film on Tuesday instead, so it'll be a preview early stream. Feel free to comment if you have a topic that you want me to talk about, and I'll be happy to do that. Everybody else that wants to stay on for like another 23, 24 minutes AMA time. So I'll sign off with stay classy.